What if the secret to lasting love in Hollywood was never about avoiding the spotlight, but learning how to stand inside it together, year after year, without letting the glare burn away what mattered most? For every headline about a shocking divorce, there exists a quieter story that rarely trends, a story of two people who chose each other again and again across 5, 6, sometimes 7 decades. These are not the marriages that dominate tabloid covers. They are the ones that outlasted them. Somewhere between the premieres and the press tours, a handful of couples built something the industry itself is famous for destroying, and their survival raises a question worth sitting with. What did they understand about commitment that so many others in their world did not? Hollywood has always been an unlikely place to search for permanence. Fame magnifies everything, including the ordinary friction of marriage, and the pressures of constant travel, public scrutiny, and shifting fortunes have ended countless unions before they reached a 10th anniversary. Yet scattered across the decades are couples who defied those odds entirely, some crossing the 50-year threshold, a milestone so rare in the entertainment world that biographers and film historians still study these relationships as case studies in endurance. Their stories are not fairy tales. They involve real strain, real compromise, and in several cases, public acknowledgement of difficult periods that could easily have ended differently. Consider Kirk Douglas and Buydens, married in 1954, a union that lasted 65 years until the actor's death in 2020 at the age of 103. And a former film publicist born in Germany, met Kirk in Paris while working on one of his productions, and their courtship unfolded against the backdrop of post-war European cinema. In later interviews and in Kirk's own memoirs, he credited and with steadying him during a career defined by intensity and ambition. Their marriage survived his near-fatal helicopter crash in 1991 and a stroke in 1996, both of which Douglas later described in his writing as turning points that deepened his gratitude for the partnership rather than straining it. And passed away in 2021, just over a year after Kirk, having spent more than 6 decades as one of the industry's most enduring philanthropic and marital partnerships. Not far behind in longevity were Newman and Joanne Woodward, whose marriage began in 1958 and lasted exactly 50 years, until Newman's death in 2008. Their story carries particular weight in Hollywood folklore because both were rising stars when they married, a combination that historically increases the odds of separation rather than lowering them. Woodward had already won an Academy Award before their wedding, and Newman would go on to build one of the most respected careers in American film. Biographers, including those who chronicled Newman's life in the years following his death, have pointed to the couple's shared commitment to craft and to causes beyond fame, including Newman's own food brand and the hole-in-the-wall gang camps for seriously ill children, as anchors that kept their partnership grounded amid extraordinary success. Newman was famously asked in interviews why he never strayed despite decades in an industry saturated with temptation, and his answer, often paraphrased in profiles of the couple, suggested a simple contentment with what he already had at home. The pattern continues with Arlene Alda and Arlene Alda, married in 1957, a partnership that has now stretched past 65 years and remains active today. Arlene, a photographer, author and former musician, has spoken publicly in various interviews about the early financial struggles the couple faced before Allen's breakthrough role in the television series MAS*H changed their circumstances entirely. What makes their story distinct is the couple's shared insistence, expressed in multiple public statements over the years, that friendship formed the foundation of their romance long before fame complicated things. Alda has often noted that maintaining curiosity about one's spouse, treating the relationship as an ongoing conversation rather than a finished project, played a central role in their staying power. Similarly durable is the marriage of Sheen and Janet Templeton, who wed in December 1961 and have remained together for more than 60 years. Sheen, born Ramon Estevez, has spoken in interviews about meeting Janet before either of them had any connection to the entertainment industry, a detail biographers often highlight as significant, since the couple weathered Sheen's rise to fame together rather than one partner adapting to an already established public life. Their 4 children, several of whom became actors themselves, have periodically referenced their parents' marriage as a stabilizing presence throughout the family's public visibility, particularly during the years when Sheen's career and personal struggles with alcohol were widely reported before his recovery, which he has discussed candidly in later years. These stories share recurring threads worth examining closely. In nearly every documented case, the couples met before extreme fame arrived, or at a moment when both partners occupied similar professional footing, reducing the power imbalance that has fractured other Hollywood unions. Shared work, whether through joint philanthropic projects, overlapping creative interests, or simply a mutual understanding of an unpredictable industry, appears repeatedly as a stabilizing factor. Biographers and entertainment historians, including contributors to retrospectives published by outlets such as Vanity Fair and The Hollywood Reporter, have noted that couples who found ways to collaborate, rather than compete or grow apart during long absences for film shoots, tended to sustain their relationships longer than those who did not. Contrast this with the far more common Hollywood narrative, one of whirlwind romances that dissolve within a few years, often under the strain of conflicting schedules, public rumors, or the sheer difficulty of maintaining privacy while living a famous life. Divorce rates within the entertainment industry have long been reported as higher than the national average, a trend attributed by sociologists and industry analysts to the combination of prolonged separations during production schedules, financial power imbalances, and the amplifying effect fame has on ordinary marital disagreements. Against that backdrop, marriages that cross the half-century mark become more than personal milestones. They become quiet rebuttals to an entire cultural assumption about fame and love being fundamentally incompatible. It would be inaccurate to suggest these marriages were without hardship. Public records and the couple's own accounts, given in interviews across the decades, reveal periods of separation, health crises, financial pressure, and the ordinary erosion that time brings to any long relationship. Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman, married in 1982, publicly announced a separation in 2017 after decades together, only to reconcile in the years that followed, a reminder that even celebrated Hollywood marriages are not immune to strain, and that longevity sometimes includes periods of genuine uncertainty rather than uninterrupted harmony. Their story, discussed candidly by both actors in subsequent interviews, adds important nuance to any narrative about lasting love, since it demonstrates that permanence is not always a straight line but can include moments of doubt that are ultimately worked through rather than avoided. Historical context helps explain why these unions stand out so sharply. The mid-20th century studio system actively discouraged actors from public relationships that did not serve a carefully managed image, and many marriages from that era were shaped, at least initially, by studio expectations rather than pure personal choice. Yet several of the couples highlighted here married for reasons entirely their own, often against the advice of agents or studio executives who worried that marriage would diminish a rising star's appeal. That some of these unions not only survived studio-era scrutiny, but continued to thrive long after the studio system itself collapsed in the 1960s speaks to a resilience built on something more durable than industry convenience. As decades passed and the entertainment landscape shifted from studio contracts to independent production, from black and white broadcasts to global streaming platforms, these couples adapted alongside the industry itself. Interviews conducted. In more recent years, including retrospectives filmed for television specials and documentary features, show partners in their 80s and 90s reflecting on how the world around their marriage transformed completely while their commitment to each other remained a fixed point. And Douglas spoke in later interviews about how technology and travel had changed everything about how films were made since she first met Kirk in post-war Paris, yet she maintained that the fundamentals of partnership, patience, humor, and a willingness to keep choosing someone had not changed at all. What emerges from these accumulated stories is not a single formula but a set of overlapping habits: shared purpose beyond fame, resilience through documented hardship, mutual respect maintained publicly and, as much as possible, privately, and a willingness to renegotiate the relationship as circumstances changed across decades. None of these marriages unfolded without friction, and biographers who have studied them caution against romanticizing any of them into flawless templates. Real strain existed, sometimes severe, and several couples have spoken candidly about how close they came to different outcomes during their most difficult years. A few other names belong in this conversation, each adding a distinct texture to the larger picture. Ozzy and Sharon Osbourne, married in 1982, spent more than 4 decades together in a union that unfolded almost entirely under public observation, first through Ozzy's chaotic rock and roll persona and later through the reality television series that turned their household into a cultural fixture. Sharon has spoken openly, in interviews and in her own memoirs, about the couple's separations, Ozzy's struggles with addiction, and her own health battles, framing their survival not as an absence of turmoil but as a repeated choice to work through it in full view of an audience that many other couples would have found unbearable. Their willingness to be candid about imperfection, rather than curate a flawless public image, arguably contributed to why audiences continued to root for them across so many turbulent years. Rita Moreno's long second marriage to cardiologist Leonard Gordon, which lasted from 1965 until his death in 2010, offers a different variation on the theme, one where a spouse outside the entertainment industry provided a kind of ballast that some purely Hollywood pairings lacked. Moreno has discussed in interviews how marrying someone with an entirely separate professional identity allowed her to maintain a sense of self distinct from her career, even as she became one of the rare performers to win an Academy Award, a Grammy, and a Tony. Historians of the industry often point to marriages like this one as evidence that longevity sometimes depends less on shared fame and more on a partner's ability to exist comfortably outside of it. Taken together, these varied paths, from Kirk Douglas and Buydens meeting amid the rubble of post-war Europe, to Alan and Arlene Alda building a marriage through the lean years before MAS*H, to Sharon Osbourne choosing to stay and rebuild again and again under the harsh light of reality television, to Rita Moreno finding stability outside the industry entirely, illustrate that there is no single script for lasting love in Hollywood. Each couple faced circumstances specific to their era, their fame level, and their personal struggles, yet all of them arrived at a similar destination, decades spent together despite an industry practically engineered to pull people apart. What remains striking, though, is how rare this kind of endurance is within an industry built on reinvention, image, and constant change. 50 years, 60 years, sometimes more, spent alongside one person while the world outside reshaped itself again and again, represents a form of stability that fame does not usually allow. These couples did not escape the difficulties fame brings to a marriage. They simply found ways, imperfect and human, to keep choosing each other despite them. In an industry that measures success in opening weekends, perhaps the quieter achievement belongs to partnerships that measured success in decades shared, ordinary mornings survived, and a commitment that outlasted nearly everything the spotlight tried to take from them.